Language barriers, oppressive heat, and even a frenzied mob. Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy worked on over 100 projects together during their careers, but their final film stands out for being truly bizarre. After starring in some of the most famous films throughout the 1930s, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy found themselves at the mercy of studios during the 1940s, and after that, World War II derailed everything. According to Laurel and Hardy, the magic behind the movies, the pair's final film, Atoll K, also called Utopia and Robinson Crusoe Land, came about because of a desire to kickstart the European entertainment industry with something everyone would love. Laurel and Hardy were approached by a team made up of representatives from the Italian, French, and British film industries, and they had a proposal that the duo couldn't refuse. Shoot a movie in 12 weeks, get paid, and create something special for a struggling world. It was 1950 when the deal for a new Laurel and Hardy movie was put on the table, and the offer came with a major draw. The two were going to have the same amount of creative control that they had in their heyday.
Well, gentlemen, could we get down to business? Oh, thank you, Stanley.
On the surface, this sounded great, but there was still a major problem. The director was French and the writers were Austrian, French, and Italian, so when they sat down to collaborate, they realized that everyone spoke a different language. The film that would become Laurel and Hardy's last was ultimately penned by Hardy himself, along with two American writers. Why? Because when the iconic duo arrived in Europe ready to start shooting, there was still no script. The movie's producers had taken their international team of writers, who all spoke different languages, and decided that the best way to get them to hash out a script was to put them up in several fancy Paris hotels. One of them, Frederick Connor, explained how well that worked out, saying, "The four of us had a whole floor in the most beautiful hotels in the world, and we were supposed to all work together there, but the others repaired at 5 o'clock to the casino and stayed there until 1 o'clock in the morning, losing every penny they had. So, not ideal." The team worked for months on the story, and Connor said that there was no agreement on anything, including what kind of movie it was going to be. Comedy, farce, and social commentary were all thrown into the mix by writers who didn't understand the languages that the others were speaking. Connor elaborated, "It got worse every week. It was terrible. Very soon in the game, frankly, I gave up. I decided there was absolutely nothing I could do but enjoy myself while I was in Paris." Atoll K is the story of what happens when Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy inherit an island that's later found to be rich in uranium. Hijinks ensue as a dynamic duo and their companions go about establishing their own country. But the original story was not like that at all. The original script saw Laurel getting picked up by a storm and deposited on an island which, for some reason, also contains crates of weapons, a grand piano, and Oliver Hardy. The uranium storyline is still there, but this time the United Nations gets involved and tries to get them to choose a country to pledge allegiance to. When they don't, officials resort to all kinds of shenanigans to get the pair to leave the island and put the uranium up for grabs.
You know what they're trying to do? They're trying to take our geraniums. That's it exactly.
The problem solves itself at the end when the atoll sinks into the ocean. If that doesn't sound great, that's because it wasn't. Even more bizarre than the storyline itself is the fact that it took the writers a whopping 3 months to hash out the project as far as they did, at which point they collectively shrugged and told the production company that it was as good as it was ever going to get. In the 21st century, promotional tours and marketing campaigns for movies are a huge deal, with stars promoting their new projects on TV and the internet. There was a promotional tour for the final film of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, too, but it was a little optimistic to say the least. In fact, it happened before there was even a script. Laurel was waiting to greet Hardy and his wife when they first made it to France, and they were quickly back on the move. From France, they headed to Italy, where they toured the country, viewed their own movies, and were expected to promote their scriptless masterpiece. Even as they were met with all the gusto and enthusiasm mustered by a post-war population eager for something to laugh at, progress on the actual movie faltered. When the pair returned, the writers sheepishly said that the script still needed a little help. Laurel was initially fine with that, but after reading what he was given, which was still 3 separate scripts, he reportedly responded, "Is this what you did all these months, boys? Did you really expect us to accept this rubbish?"
Well, for once you have used your head.
Thank you, Ollie. I'll try and do that more often.
With the script hashed out and everyone ready to get on with things, filming started, and the language barrier somehow became even more of a problem. The final version of the film had Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy speaking English, but the rest of the cast was dubbed over. Not only was the dubbing extremely obvious in the final cut, but it caused nothing but chaos on set. The movie was filmed by actors speaking 3 different languages. Some of the cast delivered their lines in their native Italian, some in their native French, and Laurel and Hardy needed to act like they knew exactly what was being said to them. The idea was that depending on where the movie was released, only certain parts needed to be dubbed. The comedy of errors didn't stop there either. Leo Joannin was a French writer who became director when the previous one left, and his grasp of English was iffy at best. His assistant was an American who spoke no Italian or French. In fact, the entire production had only a single person on the crew who could speak all 3 languages. The director of Laurel and Hardy's final movie was Leo Johannin, if you're going by the credits or the film's IMDb page. Unable to speak English and concerned with choosing the proper megaphone for shouted instructions that half the crew couldn't understand anyway, Johannin was just one reason why the making of Atoll K was so bizarre.
Boy, we'll need a crew for this one.
A crew? What do we need a crew for? I'm running this boat.
Thankfully, another director stepped in at some point, and exactly what happened after that is unclear for a weird reason. According to the book The Final Film of Laurel and Hardy, director John Barry was living in France and stepped in to help salvage what he could. Actor Suzy Delaire claimed that about half the movie was Barry's, and that's the only public information about it out there. Why? Because at the time, Barry was living in exile, and having his name attached to a movie would have meant no U.S. release. According to the New York Times, the actor-turned-director's problem started when he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee as they hunted for communist activity in Hollywood. Refusing to throw anyone under the bus, he opted for a self-imposed exile in France. He said of his time there, "The horizon of my life became infinite. I met people, encountered a culture I'd never have known otherwise, one I got to know deeply because I had to survive in it." The offer to go to France for Atoll K came in a lull in Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy's career, as they'd passed their heyday and they'd gone on a hiatus from performing together. As anyone who follows celebrity culture knows, anyone who steps away from the limelight risks losing their place in it. That was one of the reasons France was so appealing. The duo was still wildly popular there, and with some of their films only being released for the first time post-war, they were still super relevant. That came with a downside though. Getting off set and into the cities proved problematic. At one point during production, Laurel decided that he wanted to go buy a suit, but he knew that public appearances came with a kind of attention he just wasn't up for. Donning a hat and adding a pipe only got him so far. And after he was recognized, not only did a mob form, but people got hurt. After Laurel took refuge in a hat shop, locked the door, and called the police, the pushing and shoving at the door got way out of hand. Injuries included a broken arm and a broken leg, and it took involvement from the French police to disperse the crowd and escort Laurel safely back to set. In addition to the odd, awkward dialogue and reactions, there's one major thing that anyone watching Atoll K is likely to agree on. The sickly appearance of Stan Laurel is so noticeable that it's distracting. In fact, Laurel was so sick that a full team of medical personnel had to be kept on the movie set at all times. Even with constant attention, Laurel lost 51 pounds over the course of the year-long shoot. He was in constant pain throughout, stemming from a series of unfortunate illnesses. Work on the film started in the spring, and by November, Laurel was in such crippling pain that he was taken to a Paris hospital for surgery to correct a prostate problem. Feeling a commitment to return to the sets as soon as he could, he did exactly that, which meant he was back on his feet when he should have been recovering.
Still in good condition.
It wasn't long after Laurel got back on set that he got not just food poisoning, but dysentery. As filming dragged on, Laurel was only capable of remaining on his feet for about 30 minutes at a time before he became too weak to continue. Conditions on the set of Atoll K were nothing short of unbearable, and that was in part due to a massive heat wave that gripped Europe that summer. Oliver Hardy had been gaining weight in the years leading up to the production, and had begun suffering from cardiac fibrillation. Cardiac fibrillation is a condition that can cause very noticeable symptoms like chest pain, dizziness, and lightheadedness, along with more serious symptoms like weakness and fatigue. It also impacts a person's ability to do physical activities and can increase a person's likelihood of suffering something catastrophic like a blood clot or stroke. In the years after filming Atoll K, Hardy's health continued a slow downward spiral. The duo canceled what would have been their final performance after Hardy came down with the flu and suffered a heart attack after a performance in Plymouth. That was in 1954. The stroke that paralyzed him came shortly afterward, and he died in 1957. When biographer John McCabe wrote Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, he didn't spend much time on Atoll K. That's not a surprise given what Laurel had to say about it. He simply stated, "Nobody, and that includes the director and us, knew what the hell was going on." Laurel's attitude toward his final film is unsurprising given that it took him months to recover from the year-long fiasco. In the end, it was pretty much all for nothing, as the 98-minute movie wasn't even released in the US for several years. It was ultimately most popular on the small screen as a heavily edited version that ran just 30 minutes long.
I can't believe my ears.
Well, if you can't believe those ears, you can't believe anything.
Reviews ranged from brutal to heartbroken. The New York Times said that the pair should have stayed in America, while other reviewers condemned the bad dubbing and sickly appearances of both stars as being wholly distracting. Still, it was the Los Angeles Times that gave perhaps the most observant farewell, writing, "It's all too plain that Atoll K is destined to be the last of the Laurel and Hardy comedies. For the many happy hours they have given us, our grateful thanks."